It's easier to deal with your bank today than it is to deal with your government. When you think about it, it's more efficient, it's faster, it's more pleasant. You know, it's quite amazing when you think about it. And I think Canadians want to have a government that reflects their best values in the world, because we understand that the world is getting very small, very fast, that it's a much smaller world than it was 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And then as we look forward, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And therefore, we need to have a government that's engaged. So, for example, when the Prime Minister goes down to New York to receive, you know, the Intergalactic Award for Statesman of the Century, or whatever it is that he's receiving, he would also deign to spend half an hour speaking to the General Assembly of the United Nations, which also happens to be in New York, where he was today. And I think people would like to see Canada standing at the podium in the United Nations, speaking to the world about the values that drive this country, about the issues that drive us, and about the problems that are facing the world and how we want to deal with them. And by the way, as liberals, we think and feel that, you know what, the problems facing the world are not so different from the problems that face our own country. We think that people who live in Bangladesh, they also want to be secure in their lives. They also want to have a degree of prosperity. They also want to know that somebody's going to take care of them. They also want life to be sustainable. They want their government to be democratic and transparent and accountable. And they want their country to be part of a family of nations. That's because the family is getting smaller all the time. And you know, it's not about beating up on the people who are doing well. It's not about sort of getting back to the language and the lingo of class warfare. It's not about generating simplistic solutions and churning them out and then throwing them back. It's about understanding that there are things we have to do as a country. Looking out at this audience, I think everyone will understand me when I say it's not the bottom that's dropped out of our economy. It's the middle that's dropping out of our economy. And we have to understand what that means. In the years after 1945, this country grew at an enormous rate. And for a long time after 1945, it was a working assumption. And I think it was probably a working assumption of everybody in this room and of the families in which they grew up. You did okay at school, you did your best, you went out to work, you got a job, you got married, you bought a house, you had secure, relatively secure income, you had a sense that things were going to work out okay, your kids were getting on, life was what it was. You had a pension, you had a, you know, most of the workers in industrial Ontario had something called a defined benefit pension plan, where the company would stay on and you'd get that defined benefit pension plan at the end of the day. Most workers had that 30 years ago. They don't have it today. They don't have it today. And they don't have that security anymore. Most workers would go into working in a manufacturing job. Manufacturing used to be close to 20% of our economy. It's now down to 10 or 11% in Ontario. Dropped dramatically over the last 30, 40 years. And I'm not, you may notice, I'm not like blaming one particular political party for this situation. And I'll tell you what, I hope everything I say to you tonight is true, but I'll tell you something that's really true. When I became Premier in 1990, I don't know how many of you remember that. Was it good for you? I said to the people of the province the first night that I was elected, I said, I started the campaign as leader of the New Democratic Party. I ended the campaign as Premier. I'm now the Premier of all the people of the province. And something psychological happened to me as Premier, because I realized that you can't govern in the name of 25 or 30% of the population. You can't do it. You can't govern in the name of a minority. You can't, and I say that with great respect, you look at what Mitt Romney's saying, I don't care what, happens to the other 47%. I don't care what they think. You sort of figure, man, is that ever screwy? I mean, that is just so bad. I mean, to think that way. To think that you can ever govern in the name of a small number of people, or that you can govern in the name of a theory. You don't govern in the name of a theory. You govern in the name of making things better as best you can. And so, as liberals, we come at this whole business of how the world has changed in a practical way. Yes, we believe powerfully that market economies, generally speaking, around the world has been the most successful way of creating wealth that's ever been invented anywhere. Compare us to any other country, to any other system, how it's worked. We know that markets can create innovation, that giving people a stake in doing well, a stake in being successful, is a very, very critical element in creating prosperity. And we know that. And we embrace that as liberals. And historically, we always have. If Wilfrid Laurier was to come back and speak to you tonight, he would say this to you. He would say that markets are best. We believe in a free enterprise economy. We want an economy in which people are allowed to be free and allowed to be enterprising. And we have to figure out how we are going to be able to create wealth and create opportunity and create innovation in a world which is very different from the one which existed 30 or 40 or 60 or 80 years ago. We're living in a truly global economy where China and India and Russia and every part of the world is now engaging in production, engaging in competition in ways that we've never seen. And Canada can't take its prosperity for granted. We can't assume our prosperity. We can't assume that we're going to have well-paying jobs. We have to think about how we're going to create them. When I compare, for example, how many manufacturing jobs we have today, how many jobs we have in the car-producing sector in Ontario today compared to what we had 30 years ago, it's astonishing how that's changed. And when you consider that the companies are all making decisions as to where to invest, and when they make those decisions, they're looking around the world, saying, where do we go now? So we have to compete, we have to produce, we have to do well. You can't sort of say, I want to stop the world, I want to get off. You can't say, we're going to tax our way to prosperity. You can't tax your way to prosperity. You can't drive business out. You have to attract business in. But having attracted business in, and the one thing that we do know, I guess it's the one thing that is also very true, is that the better educated we are as a people, the better educated we are as a population, the better training we have, the better respect we have for education, the better off we're going to be as a country. I think we know that. And that requires a continuing engagement in that. But having said that we want to create this prosperity, we can't assume it's going to be fairly shared. The NDP makes the mistake of assuming that you can take prosperity for granted. So the first question that you'll get asked at an NDP meeting is, how do we divide up the cake? The first question is not, how do you divide up the cake? The first question is, how do you bake a cake? How do you make a cake? How do you make sure we've got the prosperity and that we can keep it going and sustain it? But the big mistake the conservatives make is they say, well, we assume once we bake the cake, everything will be fine. We can assume, to use the words of the theory, that the good things will trickle down. Well, anybody been trickled on lately? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen automatically. And when I talk about how we have to worry about the middle falling out of this economy, we have to recognize that the last 25 years, it's not a political phenomenon, it's a broad economic phenomenon. The people who've been able to benefit from globalization have done very well. And the people who've not been able to benefit from globalization have fallen further back. And so we have to figure out a way to strengthen the middle class, to strengthen the middle. That means reinforcing the economy. It means dealing with the simple fact that we cannot take social justice for granted any more than we can take prosperity for granted. And the thing that Stéphane Dion did more clearly than any other political leader in the last 20 years in this country, and he was so right, is to say, and you can't take sustainability for granted either. You can't assume it'll be there. You can't assume the economy will produce that result unless you create the proper incentives, unless you really inject sustainability deep into the life of the economy. And you can't take democracy for granted either. And we can't take accountability for granted either. And this is the conversation we need to have together as Canadians. The conversation is one that we need to have with one another because the answers are not always simple. But they are there. And one of the things that I believe needs to happen with the party is that as we move to the next phase, which is the choice of the next leader, which will take place in April, we then need to move beyond that to the choice of the ideas and the programs that we're going to take to the people of the country. And we can't wait until the election to knock on the door and say, oh, I'm here from the Liberal Party and I've got a whole new set of ideas to present to you. Because people, it's not going to work. You've got to develop those ideas early on. That's one of the strongest recommendations I'm going to make to the new leader. You've got to get on with the process of giving real substance to the ideas. Because we've got the ideas, but we need to really talk to Canadians about why they're important and how we're going to do them and how we're going to pay for them and how we're going to make sure that it gets done. And in order to do this, we need to build a stronger movement, a stronger party. Now, we got our clocks cleaned in the last election. And we had the worst result we've had since 1840, quite a while. But what's interesting is that the day after, the phones were ringing by people saying, what are we going to do to rebuild this party? What are we going to do to make it happen again? What are we going to do to make it real and exciting again? And that process has continued. We have 25,000 new supporters in the party. We have a surplus in the bank right now. We don't owe anybody anything. We have money. We need more. No. Don't applaud because we need more. And I'll explain to you why we need more. We need more because there was a time when the fundraising rules of the country were such that anybody could write a check, including companies could write a check. And then Mr. Chrétien said, well, we're going to change that, and only individuals can give money. And then Mr. Harper changed that to say, well, only individuals can give money, but they can give less, and the government can't give you any money. So, in the next election, we're going to need a bigger piggy bank than we've ever had before. If we're going to fight an election that's going to match the NDP and it's going to match the Conservatives and take us to victory in the next election. And my job has been to get the party back into a positive mode, get the party thinking about the ideas that we need to generate to succeed, do as effectively as we can to not only hold our own, but to make some new ground in the House of Commons and to achieve some success there, keep us sufficiently strong in the polls that we haven't evaporated into the air, and then say to the new leader, now you've got to take us to the next stage. And I think we're getting there. I think we're doing that, and we're going to continue to do that.